Hello everyone, my name is Vivek and I'm one of the software developers at Postman. I work on a lot of our web-based products, which some of you might have used, and today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about collections. Now, we've already seen how to create and work with requests in Postman, but your actual API is probably not just a single request. Most APIs tend to have multiple requests organized into groups, and that's basically what a collection is. A collection is a way for you to group and organize your requests to create an executable description of your API. In the Postman app UI, all of your collections in the current workspace show up in the Collections tab in the left sidebar. Knowing how to build the right collection can make it a lot easier to leverage all of the features in the Postman ecosystem. A well-formed collection makes it almost effortless to create a mock API, as we've already seen. It also makes it super easy to test, document, and monitor your API, and it also plays a key role in enabling easy collaboration. Now, there's no golden rule when it comes to building a good collection, but there are a few guidelines which can help steer you in the right direction. In general, we've seen that people tend to build collections which represent a single API. We've also seen that larger collections tend to be more difficult to consume for people and for machines. A couple hundred requests per collection is about as far as I would go. That being said, even looking at 50 requests at once can seem a bit too much when you're working, and that's where folders come in. You can use folders to add additional organization to your collections. If your collection represents a single API, folders are a great way to group related endpoints. So you may want to group API endpoints based on which entity they modify or which methods are being used. If you have an operational collection, which is a collection that represents a process rather than a single API, folders are a great way to group these steps. More importantly though, folders are essential when it comes to abstracting out repetitive configuration like authorization and scripts. Chances are you're using the same authorization mechanism for multiple requests in your collection. And configuring the authorization method on each request makes it difficult to maintain. Instead of adding the same auth or script to every single request, you can simply add them to the folder and have the requests inherit from the folder. I already mentioned that in most cases people tend to build a collection representing a single API. Let's say that we have an API for managing a bunch of zoos. We may have a group of endpoints to manage animals and another group of endpoints to manage the zoos themselves. So a collection representing that API would probably look something like this. We can also have an operational collection which represents a process rather than an API. For example, we may have a collection which can be used to migrate some data from Postman into another service like Airtable. This collection will probably have multiple requests, each representing a single step in the process. This also means that you can automate this process by automating the collection execution using something like Newman or Postman monitors. So let's see what building a collection actually looks like. Let's assume that I own a bunch of zoos across the world, and because I'm building an API-first enterprise, I have an API which I can use to manage those zoos. So my service might be hosted at a URL. Let's say zookeeper.getpostman.com. And I may have an endpoint here which I can use to list all the animals in my zoos. Now, I may also want to filter the animals based on some criteria. So let's say I want to filter by region. So what I can do is I can add a region query parameter, and that the value of this parameter can be my actual filter. So let's say right now I want to send this request and view all the animals that I have in the Sydney region. So I now have a request which represents my, it represents an endpoint in my API. So what I need to do next is save this request, and I'll just rename the request to something more descriptive like list animals, Sydney. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a collection by clicking this button here. And I'm going to name this collection Zookeeper Demo 1. Going to save that collection. Then I'm going to select that collection so that I can now save this request to the collection I just created. Now, once I do that, you'll see that the collection shows up in my left sidebar here, and it has a request I just created. If I click on that, it opens a request. Now, I ideally want each request in my collection to represent a call that I can actually make. So I know that I can also send this API request and get all the animals that I have, regardless of region. So I'm also going to save this as a new request. So I can click this little drop down next to the save button, and I can select save as. And I can see that the Zookeeper Demo 1 collection is already selected. And I'm just going to rename this request to list animals everywhere. I'm going to save that, and I can see that that also shows up here. Now, I could keep adding the individual requests, and eventually I would get a collection that looks something like this, where I have an individual request which represents each request I can make as a part of my API. So I have a bunch of requests which I can use to list animals in various regions. I have a bunch of requests which I can use to list all the zoos I have in various regions. And I have a bunch of requests that I can use to list employees in various regions. So this is a really quick collection. And what I can do is I can also add additional information to each request. So for example, here I've added a description saying find all animals in all or some of your zoos. And let's say I hire someone new as a part of my team and I want them to manage my zoos for me. It becomes very easy for me to just give them this collection and to tell them just go through this collection. It'll give them an idea of what my API structure is like. It can show them how to use the API, and it can even give them a quick description of what the API endpoints each do. So when you're working in a team, chances are that you have multiple people working on the same collection at the same time. This is where something like Postman Sync comes in handy, because it'll automatically take care of reconciling multiple changes to your collection. So if you're working on a request in your collection and one of your teammates is working on a different request, both of you will actually receive the changes from both of the modifications. And this will happen in almost real time. Now, let's say you also want to share your collection outside of your team. Maybe you want to run the collection as part of a local script. In this case, you can export the collection from the Postman app. When you export, you can get a JSON representation of that collection, which you can then send to other people or use as a part of a larger process. In the case of public APIs, however, you actually want to allow everyone to access your collection. You don't want to worry about distributing the collection yourself. And this is where the Postman API network comes in handy. The Postman API network allows you to just publish your collection, and you can use Postman as a platform for distribution. So, in summary, a single request usually does not make an API. Instead, you should use a collection to create an executable description of your API. And in addition, you can use folders for additional control and grouping of requests within your collection. Collections and folders also play a key role in maintaining repetitive scripts, tests, and authorization.